we all live with difficult bosses. We all live with challenging economic climates. We all live with a threat of redundancy from time to time. Fill in the blank. It's, as I say, it's how we react, how we respond, and what we create out of that is going to make the difference.
Today I have a very special guest for you, someone I've been working with for the last couple of years now. His name is Andrew Bridgewater. He's a chartered psychologist and he helps business owners and leaders uncover their natural resilience. Today, Andrew is going to help us work out how we get fit for business. So hi Andrew, how are you today?
Hi, great to speak to you, Ian. Very well, thanks.
Excellent stuff. So Andrew and I did some coaching, or Andrew coached me a couple of years ago now, and it's funny how someone can say one or two things and it kind of changes your life really. And those one or two things that Andrew mentioned to me, or was saying to me when we were at a session, was about the importance of getting yourself fit and healthy, getting your brain working right, making sure that you're active, making sure your blood's flowing, so that you can transform and you can put this into business to help you be more successful in business. And to start with, to be honest with you, I hope you don't mind me saying, I thought this was a little bit crazy. I thought, what on earth has this got to do with it? But by God, what a difference that made. What a real difference that made to that program.
Well, I totally agree with you, Ian, and it's interesting. The way I put it to people, as I say, it's hard to do well if you don't feel really well. And there's a massive difference between feeling okay and actually feeling on top of your game and feeling really well. So imagine, the athletics is on at the moment. So let's take a metaphor from that. It's the morning of the final of the 110 metres hurdles, for example. And you wake up with a bit of a sore throat, bit of a head cold. You're just not quite at it. It's going to be very difficult to win that gold. The margin between success and failure is so narrow. And I think in business nowadays, this is very much the case. Unless we're operating on top of our game, we're competing against people who are precisely there. And we're never going to have that edge and that advantage. And that's what I want to give to clients and people who work with me.
And I think when I first met you, I was going through the Future Leaders program, and I had no idea the step up that was needed in terms of my performance, my endurance, my well-being, my concentration that was needed in getting into this senior manager's role. And if it hadn't been for some of the things and some of the tips and tricks that you sort of shared with us on those early days, I think people just underestimate. Think, I'll just go and get that next job. Then every job, every step up that corporate ladder, every time you go up, it almost gets twice as hard as it was before, and the demands on you, and particularly in working long hours, are incredible.
They are, and I see a lot of people in danger of burnout if they're not actually burning out, because what they do is they simply start trying to pedal harder and harder with old strategies at a much higher level, as you're describing, and consequently that doesn't work. What got you there won't necessarily keep you there.
What is the classification of burnout?
Right.
What does that actually mean?
Burnout is basically where somebody gets to the point where they can't continue. They've got a level of stress and a level of challenge which is undoable. So the stress curve is kind of a bit like a bell curve. It's like the normal distribution. So you get to that point at the top of the curve where we're actually optimally stressed. And there is such a thing as good stress. We all need a bit of stress to get out of bed in the morning, to be our best, to take a great exam, to give a good presentation. However, once that becomes suboptimal, then the stress becomes negative, and beyond a certain point, that actually interferes with our performance. And basically, burnout, different symptoms for different people, but it's basically exhaustion. It's the point where you can't go on anymore, and the more you try to go on, the worse it gets.
But am I correct in thinking that sometimes you don't even know when this is happening to you?
Absolutely. And often other people will recognise it before you do. So a loved one will say, gosh, you're a bit more cantankerous than you've been of late. Or you'll wake up in the middle of the night at 3:00 and the mind is utterly cluttered with stuff that you've got to do the next day and you can't get back to sleep. Or you've got some irritability in your skin. Or you've got neck ache or headaches, or everybody has what I call a different crack of least resistance. It's that point at which stress will find it and it will find a way out. And that's what we have to become better at, is actually recognizing our own personal early warning signs. This is what I do a lot with clients, to help them get better informed and therefore start to respond before it becomes too late. Because if you suffer burnout and get in a hole, as I did, and I'm quite happy to share the story through this discussion if it's helpful, but you then have to dig yourself out of the hole for the next 6 months. And that's extremely expensive and very costly in many areas of life.
I was with a guy a few years ago now, and I didn't realise it at the time, but he suffered burnout, and he didn't know what on earth. He just broke down in a meeting, and there was a bit of tension in the meeting, but it wasn't aggressive, and he basically broke down and went home, and when he sort of surfaced, which was months later, I said, "What on earth happened there?" He says, "I haven't got a clue." He says, "It just all got on top of me, and his body just said, stop, that's it." And it was
basically we have our bodies and our minds have a way of saying enough already, but unfortunately if you get to that point, it is too late, and there are consequences. I mean, obviously none of us wants to break down in a meeting or in a formal situation. Not only that, it's then a question of repair, and that can take months, like you say, if you ever have the confidence to come back. And some people don't, they'll go off and do something completely different, which may be a good thing. But what I want to do is help educate people and help inform people to avoid that level of pain, because it is totally unnecessary. And as I say, the costs can be all too severe.
But it is preventative, right?
Well, there's a lot of stuff I do is preventative, but there's also a lot of stuff about taking things away. So right. I want to talk about this from 2 points of view. And you kind of hit the first one, which is preventative. And there's lots of stuff that you can do with your physical body to increase your stress threshold. But there's also some stuff that you can do psychologically, which is not about techniques, it's about understanding how the mind works. And I'm quite happy to talk about both of those approaches, because when you put them together, you've got a really powerful formula.
So if we take into account what people are going through in business at the minute, they're stressed on the way to work in the office because they've got poor traffic, there's poor public transport, or they're trying to rush around and get the kids sorted out before they get there. When they get in the office, everybody wants a piece of them, because although technology is here to help us, a lot of people think that in fact, some of the systems and processes that organisations have these days are actually quite antiquated in terms of getting the job done. So, what is it that you can, how do you approach these situations in terms of sort of foundation level, getting yourself together, getting fit for business?
Okay, well, as I say, there's two broad strands to this. There's a sort of physical approach and there's a mental approach. So let's talk about the physical for a moment. I think we all know intuitively that when we're healthy, when we're very well, when we're on top of our game, we can handle a much higher level of stress than when we are not in that position. When we're a little bit under the weather, or, we've been pedaling for too long, too hard, we haven't had a holiday, we've got some symptoms, we're starting to have the odd half day off work just to keep going. That's actually about physical health. So when you get your physical health right, you can operate at a very different resilience level, if you like, or your stress threshold is much higher. And that's one part of it. And I'm quite happy to talk about some of the techniques and how-tos on that, because they are easy to do, but easy not to do is the way I describe them. And I think we all kind of know what we have to do for our own good health, but life kind of gets in the way. And I use a philosophy that I call the slight edge, and it's not my own name. It's something from a book by a guy called Jeff Olson, Jefffolson. It's The Slight Edge Secret to a Successful Life. And basically I can boil it down to a simple sentence. Small, simple things compound to produce a massive difference, but you have to do them to benefit. So let me ask you a question, and you're going to know the answer by the question.
I hope so.
Would you rather have £1 million today, or a penny compounded, i.e. doubled in value every day for the next 30 days? So it's a penny today, 2p tomorrow, 4p, 8p, 16, 32, 64, etc. for 30 days. Which would you rather have?
Well, because I've been in some commercial roles in my time, I know it's the penny's the better one for me.
Do you know how much the penny compounds to in 30 days?
I don't actually know.
I'm just curious, if you know.
A lot.
Right.
An awful lot.
It is a lot. It's 5,500,000 and some pounds. It's
Wow.
a huge amount of money. Now, most people go at health like they're trying to win the million today. So
Right.
they'll join the
Down the gym.
go frenetically at it. They'll go on a detox. They'll do dramatic stuff. So what I prefer to do is show people how to use small, simple changes to lifestyle, some of which is nutrition, some of which is other aspects of lifestyle, to compound the penny over 30 days to create a massive wave of change, which they can live with for the rest of their lives. Now, that's a very different philosophy than, as I say, trying to win the million today.
Absolutely. So taking those two areas that we've got there about the physical and the mental, tell us a little bit about your story and what happened to you.
Well, that's kind of explains the whole thing, really. And we talk about burnout. Well, back in 2006, I was running my own business. I just qualified as a chartered psychologist, bizarrely, and people always say, "Wow, this is very odd." And I literally burnt out over the course of about 4 months. And the reason that happened, and it sounds crazy when I relay the story now, as I say, I did a radio interview last week and I shared this. And I've kept quiet about it for 10 years because I was so embarrassed and humiliated. What happened was I bought an investment property in Cyprus. And within 3 months of buying that property, the local property market crashed. About 25% went off the value of properties. I bought it with a large mortgage, so I was suddenly in negative equity from a position where I actually had some equity in it. So I couldn't rent it, I couldn't pay the mortgage, and to add insult to injury, Cyprus went into the euro at a very strong rate. The Cyprus pound went in at a very strong rate. My monthly mortgage payments doubled from about £700 to about £1,200, £1,300, pretty much overnight. So I had a hole I was shoveling money into. I'd never bought an investment property before, had been on a 2-day course to find out how to do it. Thought, how hard can it be? Let me just go over there and do it. And I literally beat myself up night and day for 4 months of negative non-stop thinking. And I don't think we realise what an impact that can have. Now, that was in slight edge fashion. The only trouble was it was the slight edge in the wrong direction. So if you have non-stop negative self-critical thoughts for 4 months, you will literally end up where I was, which was a psychiatric hospital for
Wow.
5 weeks. Now, that I'm utterly I was utterly embarrassed about it. Actually, I've realised now it can happen to anybody. And in many ways, it was my most profound awakening, because as I lay there heavily medicated, as a chartered psychologist, this is the bizarrest thing ever. I thought, what on earth has become of me? And at that point in my life, it was literally the lowest ebb. I thought, well, things can't get any worse. You know, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I live in a nice house, I have all the trappings of a happy life. And I've just dug myself into the most enormous hole. How am I ever going to get out of this? Now, what happened with me is that it was that thinking that took me there. And this is where the psychological bit comes in that I actually hadn't been trained about as a psychologist. This is new stuff, and I've discovered it since. That basically we create our personal reality via our own thoughts. Now, that sounds really trite. But Shakespeare said this in Hamlet. He said that there is nothing good or bad, only thinking makes it so. So I had an external circumstance in my life. As I say, I explained, I bought a property, the market crashed, I couldn't afford the mortgage. But it was my thinking about that created my personal reality. And I'll tell you why, because 10 years later, that mortgage is paid off. The house I can go and stay at any time. I was there 2 weeks ago. I can work out there, I've got the internet out there. And I now have a completely different attitude to that. However, there were some very heavy costs to pay. It cost me my marriage. It cost me access to my kids. It cost me 6 months of lost income, the smallest of consequences in relation to the others I just shared. But the point is that it was a price I didn't have to pay. And I've spent the next 11 years researching everything I could find to avoid a visit from what Winston Churchill called the black dog of depression. I mean, here was a guy who could deal with a level of stress, if ever there was one, but he still got depressed from time to time. He still let his thinking run riot in his own mind. And yet, as I say, for the next 11 years, I've made it my life's work, and it will continue to be for as long as I exist. I believe that nobody needs to go to that place. But unfortunately, the help and support to drag me out wasn't available. All that was on offer was drugs. And let me just finish the story briefly, Ian. What happened was I went on antidepressants, very heavy doses, for 18 months. And one of the side effects was massive weight gain, because these things messed with my appetite. They have different side effects for different people. But the problem is they don't work unilaterally for people, and they have unpleasant side effects. And while it might have given me a bit of respite, the side effects were so intolerable that I decided to come off the antidepressants of my own volition against professional advice at the time. But I was still left with this excess 3.5 stone in weight, so I was weighing 14.5 stone, and it didn't go. And that weight hung around, obviously not great for your mood when you've put on all of that sort of weight and you come off antidepressants. And that's when I started to research everything I could find about healthy lifestyle, depression, stress management. And as I say, it's become my life's work. And I now am able to help other people avoid that sort of trap, that sort of problem that I fell headlong into, because it's so unnecessary. Really tragic, and I see many people who are in danger of going that direction because we just don't know any better, and I didn't at that time. That experience has totally transformed my life, because I, as I say, I kept quiet about it for 10 or 11 years. The only people that knew were close personal friends and loved ones. But I gave a speech at my old school, which happens to be Shakespeare's old school in Stratford-on-Avon. And I shared the story for the first time, and it resonated with so many people. It's gone on the internet. I've got it on my website at andrewbridgewater.com, so people can hear it. And it relays pretty much what I've said, but in the context of Shakespeare. And what he knew about mental health and well-being clearly demonstrates that he was ahead of the curve, not only as a playwright, but also as a psychologist. It's fascinating.
That's an amazing story, Andrew. Thank you very much for sharing that. I know it's very, very, very close to you, but it's one that we can all learn from. And it's amazing what journey you've been on because of the way that you were thinking about something. And, you know, people would sort of take the mickey sometimes when you're going, how can you be so positive? And positive thinking doesn't do this. And there's all these the quotes around it. But it's when you have constant negative thinking, whether that be from inside or whether it be from others outside influencing you, you know, the effects that can have on your business or have on you and your business is quite devastating. It is.
And what I want to say, Ian, is it's not trying to suddenly turn that into positive thinking, because that's damned hard work. I'm not a fan of techniques. I'm actually a fan of understanding how our psychology actually works. And now that I have discovered that, and I'll share how that works from my experience, then everything changes. It really does, because I realized that reality that I was experiencing was of my own creation. Can I give a bit of a metaphor here to help people understand what I mean by creating reality? I shared this in an email that you might have seen the other week, but basically I was at the Festival of Speed a few weeks ago, and
you're lucky man.
I was. It was wonderful, and as a bit of a petrol head, I was in paradise. And one of the things they had there, which I found quite fascinating, was a virtual reality roller coaster. Now, clearly, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with motor cars, but what happens is you sort of watch this row of people having this experience strapped onto a seat that moves a little bit. They're all in a row, and they've got these virtual reality headsets on. And I stood there in the queue watching these people, thinking, this is going to be interesting. And they were literally screaming for their lives. You know, that they were having this experience, this virtual reality experience on a roller coaster, sat strapped into a chair in a tent at the Festival of Speed. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go on this ride, quotes, and I'm going to experience what it's like to flip-flop between that virtual reality roller coaster and the knowing, the truth, being that I am sat on a chair in a tent at the Festival of Speed, totally safe. Nothing is going to happen.
You're trying to trick the game.
Yeah, I mean, fascinating. You want to try it sometime. If you ever get a chance to go on anything that's to do with virtual reality, because it is so compelling. And you can flip-flop between the virtual reality and the truth, the knowing that you are perfectly safe and secure. And it's a wonderful experience. I advise anybody to have it because, and this is the point of the story, we're all living a virtual reality experience, whether we realize it, every moment of our lives. And we experience our life through our personal thinking. So Shakespeare had it absolutely right. This is not a play on words. This is how the psychology of mind actually works. So if you're having an argument with your boss or a client, or you feel some resentment towards a partner or anybody else, your personal experience, your personal experience has been created by your own thinking. And their virtual reality of that situation is going to be very different to yours. We all know this intuitively. But when we actually operate out of it, it's very different. And I'll tell you why this matters. Because instead of getting sucked into our thinking, as I was spectacularly in 2006 to my detriment, ending up in a psychiatric hospital, we can actually know for sure that it's just our thinking. In other words, it's just that virtual reality roller coaster. And actually, I'm totally safe. Because our thinking can actually run amok. It can create severe feelings that make us think that we are literally in jeopardy for our lives, and we're not.
If we link that then, and that's a great story, and I will definitely going to try that just for the crack next time I'm near one of those virtual reality consoles. So if we take that thought process then into business, and the fact that I know, because I've seen it time and time again, there is so much hidden potential, there's so many future leaders and so many people who could be living a better version of themselves, but they're not, because they're scared, they're fearful, they're worried about making themselves look silly, they're worried about failing and things like that. How can we help them using these types of techniques and the knowledge that you've got to...
Well, this isn't, I just want to be clear in, this isn't a technique, and you don't have to do anything. You just have to understand how our psychology works. Now, I'm not, this isn't something I've invented. This actually comes from something called the 3 principles. It operates under a number of different headings. The 3 principles is one, psychology of mind is another, innate health is another. So we've actually all got innate mental health, whether we realise it or not, because toddlers don't need therapy. If you've ever noticed, a toddler's mood can fluctuate from total turmoil 1 second to happy giggling, literally a minute later, without them having to spend 2 days ruminating and blaming who put them in that state in the first place. And they just get on with life. And we've learned the wrong strategy as adults. Something happens when we get a separate ego and a separate identity, that we start to learn to have to protect that. And this is when we get into trouble. But actually, when we come out of the womb, we're all innately mentally healthy. Now, I find that utterly fascinating. And that changes everything when you know that. And when I say when you know it's truth. And it is a fundamental truth. It's a profound truth in the same way that gravity is a truth and a principle that we can operate in. And the same is true with these 3 principles. The fact is that we all create our personal reality moment to moment through our thinking. And it's our feelings that are giving us feedback in the moment about how that thinking is doing. So if we're feeling crap, if we've got some really negative feelings going on, it's actually because we're thinking thoughts which are consistent with that. Now, traditional approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy or neuro-linguistic programming would have us then do a technique at that point, and to try and replace the negative thought with a more constructive, positive one, which potentially could change the way we feel. And I tried to do that for years. The problem is with it, it's extremely hard work, and it doesn't actually get to the root cause. Because when you understand that those feelings are coming from your own thinking, and that's virtual reality, you can let that thinking go, just don't pay attention to it. You don't have to replace it with any other thinking. You just have to acknowledge that it's your virtual reality roller coaster, and that it will change, and that it doesn't have any power over you. So when you don't operate and act out of that thinking, or churn it even more to the extent that it becomes even more convoluted and messy and uncomfortable, then it will just change. It will just go. We have this natural self-clearing mechanism in the mind. And yet we don't allow ourselves to do that. We get so caught up with our personal thinking that we literally, as I did, enable it to take us into a very dark place. And it's so unnecessary, as I've discovered, as I say, firsthand.
But if if some of the listeners are sitting here and they're thinking, okay, well, if I've got a problem at work and I've got an issue with my boss, or I've got an issue with my team or whatever, it's not just going to go away.
No, it's not.
It's the and I'm panicking and I'm worrying about it. So there are some steps that we need to take as individual professionals.
You see, that's what everybody will tell you. you think, right, what have I got to do to get rid of this problem or to change this problem? I actually think when we understand the profound nature of what I'm talking about here, it does change everything, because actually we seem to think, we've been conditioned to believe that our outside circumstances create the way we feel. So it's our boss's fault, it's the company's fault, it's the client's fault, it's the business climate's fault. And while we continue to believe that, we're powerless. We can't do anything about it. Yet when we acknowledge that actually that's a circumstance, but I don't have to get sucked into that. So my boss is making life really hard for me right now. How do I react to that? Now, I'm not saying that you just roll over and you pretend that this isn't happening, but you do need to recognize that you've got your virtual reality goggles on in relation to this. And your boss has probably got a very different view of virtual reality right now. So wouldn't it be kind of interesting just to imagine what that view might be? And to recognize that, in fact, at this very moment, you don't need to get hooked by that negative thinking, because the moment you do, you actually make the situation 10 times worse. We all live with difficult bosses. We all live with challenging economic climates. We all live with a threat of redundancy from time to time. Fill in the blank. It's, as I say, it's how we react, how we respond, and what we create out of that that's going to make the difference.
So it's about self-awareness then, isn't it? Managing your self-awareness.
Self-awareness is a very important part of it. But again, what happens is that these things have very trite labels, and people think, oh, all I've got to do is become more self-aware. So they'll Google, how do I become more self-aware? Maybe go on an emotional intelligence course, and then it's supposed to be fixed. As I say, when you understand how your psychology actually works, and I would encourage anybody listening to this whose curiosity is piqued a little bit, Google the 3 principles. Google Sydney Banks, who was the person who first brought this approach to the world back in the early 70s. And you'll start to appreciate that there's actually really something here to explore. And it's hugely profound in business. It's having a massive impact. But a little bit like when people started to say the Earth is not flat, it's round. Everybody will pile in and say, well, actually, why have we got NLP? Why have we got cognitive behavioural therapy? Why have we got psychotherapy? Why have we got drugs? Why have we got all of these other things? Unfortunately, they are not delivering. This is psychology 1.0, which is kind of reaching the end of the road, in my view. It does. I think the challenge can be, as I say, if we think we've got to do 101 things to change ourselves, that's exhausting. You haven't got to do any of that. You've simply got to understand how your personal psychology works, and that's how I'm giving some insights to that, hopefully. But you will have your own insights, anybody listening to this who wants to explore it, because you've got everything you need inside you.
So moving this onto some core nuggets of information from yourself then, Andrew, if you were stuck in a rut, if you were like a lot of the listeners here, or maybe some of the listeners are not stuck in a rut, but they're just a bit stagnant and they're looking for other things to move on to, how can we, what's some of the key things that we can do in terms of our thinking to get us in that top position for, fit for business, so that we can then take on more, we can then take on more responsibility, we can then look for higher and greater and better things?
Right. Well, I'm going to give you 3 things which are actually a mix of physical well-being and psychology. So, as I say, I think physical well-being, there's a lot of how-tos that are very powerful. When it comes to psychology, it's much more about the background. So let's talk about physical well-being. Anybody listening to this might suddenly think, in relation to what I'm about to say, I already know that. Well, there's an ancient Buddhist saying that I like to use: to know and not to do is not yet to know. So if you know this stuff and you don't do it, you're not getting the benefit. So it's not compounding to give you a slight edge impact. So the first one is drink 2 to 3 litres of water a day and add dried wheatgrass to that water. Now, some people have come across wheatgrass. They might have had wheatgrass shots as a student, because it basically gives you like 10 doses of vegetables in one go, and it's one way that students can avoid scurvy. But the point is that you need to build this up gradually. Wheatgrass is actually very detoxing, which is good and bad. And we all know that when we're having a really radical detox, we get flu-like symptoms. We don't feel great. You don't need to do that when you add, first of all, a teaspoon of dried wheatgrass to a litre of water. And then over the next 2 weeks, you gradually increase it to 2 teaspoons in a litre of water. Now, if you do that twice a day, i.e. you have 2 litres of water with up to eventually 2 teaspoons of wheatgrass, you will see a massive wave of change. But you won't see it today and tomorrow. You'll see it in 3 to 4 weeks. Now, most people will think, well, 3 to 4 weeks, that's quite a long time. Actually, it's not. When you think about the fact that, for example, if you've got some ill health symptoms, those have evolved over quite a long period of time. 3 weeks to make a massive impact on your health, energy, resilience is not very long. And that's a slight edge technique. The penny's got to do the work. So you've got to do the wheatgrass today, tomorrow, next day, and so on for 3 weeks. And I guarantee you, if you do that one thing, you will see a massive, massive wave of change in terms of your health. Your skin will look better, you'll sleep better, you'll be less irritable, you'll be more clear thinking. I can't even begin to describe.
No, I must admit, I'm a wheatgrass fan, and it is pretty amazing. It gets your blood going again, doesn't it?
And it's very cheap. We're not talking a multi-level marketing product at 50 quid a packet. We're talking something that is £10 and it will last you for 6 to 8 weeks. This is cheap, and the benefits are enormous. It really is catching on now. You can get it on Amazon.
It's good.
You get it anywhere. I swear by this stuff. Now, when I first was introduced to it, somebody introduced me a cocktail of this, which was a multi-level marketing thing. And I bought it for a while and tried to tell it to people. I realised actually it's a racket. You don't need the expensive ones. You just need the bog standard. But make sure it's organic. But it's fantastic stuff. So that's one simple example, right? Easy to do, easy not to do. Okay. In other words, you can do it today, and you won't notice the difference today and tomorrow. But as I say, over time, it will compound to produce a massive difference. Now, I'm a big fan of relaxing the mind, and I'm the reason I think we need to do that. I've kind of touched on it. Is that our thinking becomes very cluttered very easily, and mine did, as I said, in dramatic fashion in 2006. And one of the techniques, and this is a technique that I use daily, is mental relaxation or meditation. Now, there are so many different forms, you kind of had to find your own one. But again, in slight edge fashion, if you do this, it's coming at your well-being from a mental point of view, as opposed to a physical point of view, but it will kind of meet up. So the power of the mind and body in combination, as we know, is huge. So if you actually do 15 minutes of meditation or mental relaxation every day, you'll find yourself thinking more clearly, solving problems more easily, being less irritable, as I say, sleeping better, having less stress symptoms. Your resilience will increase. So those are just 2 things I've mentioned. Wheatgrass and daily meditation, compounding daily to produce a massive difference. Now, my book, Fit for Business, contains 12 weeks of changes like that. All of them easy to do, easy not to do. But when you combine them together, the wave of change becomes a tsunami. Not only that, it's not something you'd not want to do anymore. So you wouldn't want to go back to the toxic, unhealthy, stressed out lifestyle because it's not as much fun.
No.
But that's the second thing. And the third thing I would advise people to do, and this is a kind of different one, is Google Sydney Banks, Google the psychology of mind. Explore that.
Do some learning.
And when you do that, you'll come up with your own insights on what I've been talking about, which will be far more profound for you and impactful than anything I could ever say. And you'll remember them and they'll implement change in your own life. So I'm a big fan of people kind of coming up with their own insights, making their own change happen, enabled, supported, facilitated by a coach such as you or I. But ultimately, we've got to make our own stuff work. We've got to make our own change happen. And when we have the insights from within, then they become much more profound and we're much more likely to implement change on the back of those. So those are the 3 things I would suggest people do.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Andrew, for that. Okay, moving on. How do you manage your work-life balance? All important work-life balance. Everyone keeps talking about, and everyone's got different versions of what it means. But what's the key things for yourself in having that work-life balance?
I think from my point of view, it's recognising that you do need to recharge. And I think we all know this. We all know that if we haven't had a holiday for a long time, then we're going to get irritable. Our productivity at work suffers. We go off the peak performance curve. And I say it's recognising your own early warning signs. So, and everybody's different here. And the trouble with work-life balance is what my work-life balance isn't the same as yours, isn't the same as somebody else's. And it's the wrong phrase in a way. The only reason I use it is a Google search term that people are very familiar with.
Yeah.
You could almost say life-work balance. It's certainly not about 50-50. And it's not. It's certainly not about literally sitting on a seesaw. It's a complex interaction, and the way I work with it is in a combination of the psychological and the physical, as I've been describing, to a point where actually somebody intuitively knows when their own life and work are in balance, and that's different for all of us. So you've got to go on your own personal journey with this, and you will step over the line at some point, as I did dramatically, and I just don't want people to crash and burn because it's not necessary. So the reason why work-life balance has become so important is that companies are aware that if people burn out, it's very detrimental. It's very detrimental to business, personal relationships, to health, and ultimately to the reputation of the organisation. Because if your business is one where people regularly burn out, social media is going to spread that around like wildfire, and you'll suddenly have a reputation as an organisation that nobody wants to work for.
So question 1 I've got here, Andrew. What would you tell your 25-year-old self if you were talking to them today?
This sounds so trite, but it's all going to be fine.
Is that it?
It always
all going to be all right.
And the trouble is we make it all up. We have this virtual reality experience which we can create a living hell out of, as I personally did. And yet, as I say, the reality, the truth is that 11 years later, that external circumstance has changed beyond my wildest imagination.
Yeah.
So just live with it and recognise that it will change.
Live with it.
Particularly if it's not, if it's about your personal thinking, if it's something that you are literally creating through your own personal thinking.
Okay. Cool. Second question we've got here is, if you were a university lecturer, what subject would you go back to university to lecture? What knowledge would you like to pass on?
I'd like to do what I'm doing now, so I go back. In fact, I'm talking to business schools and universities. I've got
That's an easy one then, isn't it?
Resilience and well-being at work is massive. And actually, it's one of the big themes that's coming up in business psychology now. How can we become more resilient, to take on more, to be more, to do more with less? Because obviously that's the challenge for most organisations. They're continually being asked to deliver more for less. We all know that. And
it takes a toll on your health.
And
that's why we're here today.
It's bound to. And as I say, that's why we have to take our own personal responsibility. But organisations are becoming more and more interested in this because clearly it can cost them. I was into a bank recently delivering a half-day workshop on resilience because they've got to deliver. This particular team has got much enhanced targets next year. They've got to basically deliver 25% more for the same resources. So inevitably they've got to dig deeper. That's all about resilience.
Yeah, making sure that they can achieve more.
Yep.
Okay, third question. What has been your best investment?
My best investment has been my own education and my own research, particularly into this area of resilience and well-being. Not only because it's benefited me, but because it enables me to throw a rope to other people when, as I say, I couldn't find any help and support available other than drugs at a time when actually I was in a real mess in my own life. So it's ironic, isn't it, that life's biggest challenges can turn out to be our awakenings and our way of not only giving ourselves salvation, but potentially offering it to other people. So I feel very blessed in many ways, but it's taken a long time to get to that realization.